Welcome, traveler of dreams. Tonight's video features a chilling compilation of the most terrifying stories to set the perfect mood for Halloween. Before we get started, remember to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss future horror stories like these. Also, let me know where you are watching from, so go ahead and leave a comment. Let's begin. Halloween night of 2022 was supposed to be nothing more than a casual night out in downtown Boulder. At 31, I was well past the age where dressing up felt exciting. It had started feeling more like a social obligation, but my roommate Tessa insisted I come along with her and our friend Claire for a Halloween bar crawl. We'd spent that afternoon throwing together last-minute costumes. I went as a vampire, fake blood painted down my chin, Tessa, a zombie nurse with gory makeup on her arms, and Claire, a witch covered in shimmering green face paint she spent nearly 2 hours perfecting. The three of us had been inseparable since college. Though adulthood had pulled us into our own routines, me in a marketing job, Tessa teaching 3rd grade, and Claire managing a boutique downtown, we always made time for these occasional nights out together. The evening began typically enough for Halloween: overpriced drinks, dreadful music, and grown adults stumbling around in cheap synthetic costumes. The crawl carried us through 5 crowded bars, each one more suffocating than the last. By the time midnight came around, exhaustion had replaced excitement. We'd been responsible enough to leave our cars at home, intending to take a rideshare back. But when we emerged onto Carson Street, the apps all showed at least a 45-minute wait. Claire kept refreshing her phone, swearing at the surge prices that had tripled, while Tessa sat on the curb trying to avoid smearing her zombie makeup. That's when a man dressed as a firefighter approached us. His costume wasn't the flimsy kind, it looked authentic, heavy and detailed. He had a relaxed, friendly energy as he gestured toward a black SUV across the street, claiming he was actually a rideshare driver whose app had glitched but could take us home for cash at the regular fare. He seemed perfectly legitimate. He quoted the exact base rate to our neighborhood, had a little pine-scented air freshener dangling from the mirror, and offered cold bottled water from a cooler in his back seat. What sealed our trust was how polished he was, checking our destination on his phone, confirming our names before we'd said them. It struck me as odd for half a second, but Tessa laughed and said hers aloud, and we all followed suit. He helped Claire into the passenger seat since her platform boots made walking difficult, while Tessa and I slid into the back. The SUV interior looked spotless: smooth leather seats, chargers in each door pocket, faint scent of disinfectant. It felt like any professional ride I'd ever taken. Soft pop music played low on the radio, and he even asked if we wanted to change the station. He chatted easily while driving, talking about how busy Halloween always was for drivers, mentioning road closures downtown that we had already seen, and complaining about drunk passengers who'd made a mess in his car the week before. The bottled water he'd offered was sealed and store-bought. I had checked old habits from my mom's relentless stranger danger warnings. What came next exists only in jagged fragments. I remember Claire laughing at something on her phone, her green-painted face illuminated by the screen. I remember Tessa mentioning a parent at her school who had complained about frightening decorations for kids. I remember the driver adjusting his mirror, asking if we needed to stop anywhere. Then nothing. No darkness, no sleep, just blank space, like time had been carved away. The next thing I knew, I was waking up on my own couch the following afternoon, still wearing my vampire costume, fake blood dried and crumbling on the fabric. My phone sat dead on the table. My keys were in the kitchen sink, and my shoes were neatly placed at the door, something I never did. I plugged my phone in, hoping texts or photos might explain the night. Nothing after midnight, just 13 missed calls from Claire's boyfriend Ryan. The call history showed I had dialed Tessa at 3:47 a.m., but I couldn't recall doing it. When I tried calling her back, it went straight to voicemail. That's when panic began to build. Ryan answered my call immediately, his voice shaking. He asked if Claire was with me. She hadn't come home, hadn't answered any calls, her phone off. He'd already called hospitals, even checked with her parents in Lakewood. No one had seen her since the bar crawl. My head throbbed. Not like a hangover, but a strange heaviness that made thought itself hard. I told him I'd just woken up, that my memory stopped at the car ride. The silence that followed seemed endless. 20 minutes later, Tessa burst into my apartment, still in her zombie costume, mascara streaked like black rivers. She had woken up in her own bed with the same gap in memory, Her apartment unlocked, purse contents spread out across the counter. We both remembered the SUV, then nothing, yet somehow we had woken up safely in our own homes while Claire was missing. For the next few hours, we retraced every step. We called every bar, walked down Carson Street searching for the black SUV or the firefighter. The bartenders remembered us. Hard to forget 3 women in full costume, but none had cameras facing the street. A bouncer from the 3rd bar said he'd seen us talking to a guy in firefighter gear who'd been hanging around all evening but never actually went inside any bar. Ryan had already filed a missing persons report. By Monday morning, 2 detectives came to take our statements. Detective Howell, a seasoned woman with silver streaks in her hair, and Detective Monroe, younger and tense. Howell kept asking about the water bottles. Had we drunk them? Did we still have them? We hadn't. Neither of us could remember whether we even opened them. Monroe focused on the man, scrolling through photos of registered rideshare drivers. None looked familiar. The SUV? All I could tell them was that it was black, maybe a Chevy or GMC, with a digital backup camera display. Tessa only recalled tan leather seats and an energy drink can and a cup holder. The first breakthrough came Wednesday. Howell called to say they'd found footage from an ATM camera 2 blocks away. Timestamp 12:23 a.m. The car pulled from the curb, all 3 of us visible inside. The plate was partly covered with mud, though they made out a Colorado F prefix. They tracked it through traffic cameras moving east, but then losing it after it turned into an industrial district near the rail tracks. Patrol units searched the area, abandoned warehouses, storage lots, but found nothing. Howell added that in the ATM video, the driver wore thick work gloves while helping Claire into the car, though the night had been mild. Friday morning changed everything. A jogger found Claire's phone in a drainage ditch 8 miles outside the city, near an unused service road. It was still recording audio only since 12:31 a.m., about 8 minutes after we'd entered the SUV. 67 hours of continuous sound before the battery died. The police didn't tell us all the details, but Howell's expression said more than words. She explained that the first hour contained muffled voices and car noises, then long stretches of silence interrupted by strange, unclear sounds. Around 40 minutes in, Claire's voice could be heard saying she felt sick, asking why we weren't responding. After that, nothing from her again, just ambient noises and much later, crunching gravel. Then came the part that destroyed me. At 1:15 a.m., the recording caught a garage door opening and closing, followed by scraping, heavy shifting like objects being dragged. At 2:47, the distinct ignition of another engine, probably a truck, that drove for roughly 20 minutes before stopping. Then the rhythmic sound of a shovel striking dirt for almost an hour. Forensics analyzed the audio for background clues and tried tracing GPS data, but whoever held that phone had disabled location tracking. It stayed in that ditch until it was found. The detectives asked if anyone had mentioned construction sites or rural property, but our memories were nothing but static. Saturday brought the most chilling discovery. Audio specialists enhanced a section from 3:30 a.m., isolating a conversation between 2 men, the fake firefighter and another voice. The second asked something about the other 2 and whether they'd remember. The first voice replied, partly garbled, but words like dose and their apartments were audible. That's when I understood fully. He had been inside my home. He'd carried me in, arranged my belongings, left me posed on my couch. Tessa collapsed when she realized the same had happened to her. The police combed through both our apartments. No foreign prints, no hair, no fibers. He'd been meticulous. Even the bottles were gone. The FBI joined once it seemed interstate kidnapping was possible. Background audio hinted at movement toward Wyoming or Nebraska. Search dogs combed the industrial zone. They alerted in several spots but found nothing. Ryan could barely function, staying with his parents, avoiding the apartment he and Claire had shared. The entire crime felt horrifyingly calculated. This person had studied rideshare patterns, quoted exact prices, known which areas lacked cameras. He'd drugged 3 people so precisely that 2 of us survived. He'd somehow known our names, maybe overheard them earlier or seen our IDs. The firefighter disguise wasn't random. It played on trust. Every step had been engineered, from the spotless car to making us look merely drunk enough to dismiss suspicion. 2 weeks later, the case took a grim turn. A construction worker renovating an old firehouse 40 miles out found a firefighter uniform stuffed behind a wall, along with car keys and a roll of cash. The keys matched a black Suburban registered to a man named Peter Lawson, reported missing 3 days before Halloween. His burned vehicle turned up a week later near the Kansas border, forensics finding traces of Claire's blood in the trunk. Peter's body was discovered in his basement, dead since October 28th. The killer had taken his car, his identity, and used them as a trap. A gas station camera near Peter's home showed a man fueling the Suburban on October 30th, wearing a baseball cap, face hidden, build matching our vague memory. The same man appeared on downtown cameras on Halloween night, already dressed in the firefighter uniform. Claire's body was never found, though searches spanned months with cadaver dogs and radar scans. No one was ever caught. The DNA at Peter's house matched no records. The fingerprints belonged to someone without a traceable history. Tessa couldn't stay in Colorado. She moved back to Ohio with her parents. Ryan left the state too, vanishing somewhere in Florida. I stayed, though I've turned my apartment into a fortress of locks and alarms. I've tried therapy, hypnosis, anything to recover those missing hours, but maybe forgetting is mercy. The police still call occasionally with leads that fade into nothing. The last thing they told me haunts me most. At the tail end of the recording, just before the phone died, there was a faint train horn and someone whistling what sounded like a child's song. Claire's parents still reach out, hopeful I'll remember something to bring closure. All I can tell them is the same thing I tell myself every night, that she got in that car with us, and then she was gone, and somehow 2 of us woke up. Halloween night, 2018. I was 16, and my biggest concern that day was whether Dylan from chemistry had noticed my new haircut. My parents owned a quiet little bookshop downtown, and we lived in an aging Victorian home on the outskirts of Meadowbrook, California, right where the neighborhood faded into a dense stretch of woods. That night, my younger brother Ethan was off at a sleepover, and my parents had gone to bed a little after 11, once the last wave of trick-or-treaters had stopped knocking. I stayed in my room scrolling through Instagram, texting my best friend Madison about the Halloween party we weren't allowed to go to because my dad said it would run too late. The house had settled into silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the old floorboards and the rustling of wind through the oak tree outside my window. Sometime around midnight, a faint, rhythmic knocking came from downstairs. It wasn't loud or forceful, just soft and steady. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. Another pause. At first I assumed it was some group of kids pulling one last Halloween prank. Our neighborhood wasn't a stranger to that. Teenagers from the nearby high school sometimes threw eggs at doors or left creepy dolls on porches just to spook people. I slipped quietly out of bed, careful to avoid the one floorboard near my door that always squeaked, and crept down the hallway. The knocking continued in that same patient rhythm, unhurried, almost deliberate. From the top of the staircase I could see the front door dimly lit by the porch light, which sent long shadows stretching through the frosted glass panels. I tiptoed toward the living room and edged up to the side window near the door. The blinds were closed, but I tilted them just enough to peek through without being seen. What I saw made my breath catch. A woman was sitting on our porch steps, facing away from the door. She was barefoot, which struck me as odd for late October, and her shoulders trembled as though she were freezing or crying. Her hair hung long and tangled down her back, matted and unkempt. She was wearing what looked like a light blue nightgown, though even from behind I could see dark stains spreading across it. The way she hunched and rocked gently forward and back made her look fragile, almost broken. She'd stopped knocking and was now just sitting there, shaking under the dim yellow light. I must have made a sound, because she began to turn her head. I jumped back from the window immediately, heart pounding so hard it filled my ears. I thought about waking my parents, but another part of me hesitated. What if she really needed help? Maybe she'd been in an accident, or someone was chasing her. Curiosity won. I looked again, just enough to glimpse the side of her face. It was pale, almost gray beneath the porch light, and there were streaks down her cheeks, though I couldn't tell if they were from makeup, grime, or blood. She kept glancing nervously toward the street, as if expecting someone or something to appear. Then, all at once, she started knocking again, louder this time, and I could hear her voice through the door, ragged, hoarse, and desperate, saying something I couldn't quite make out. The sound was enough to wake my parents. I heard their bedroom door open upstairs. Then my dad's footsteps as he came down, wearing his robe and squinting into the hallway light. "What's going on?" he asked when he saw me frozen near the window. I pointed to the door and whispered about the woman outside. His brow furrowed as he leaned toward the peephole. His face changed instantly from irritated to deeply concerned. He turned back to me and said quietly, "Go wake your mother and tell her to bring her phone." I bolted upstairs. Mom was already awake, sitting upright in bed. When I told her, she grabbed her phone and followed me back down. Dad stood by the door, the chain still latched, speaking softly to whoever was outside. Through the gap, I could now hear the woman clearly. "Please, please," she gasped. "You have to help me. He's coming for me. I got away, but he's coming. Please let me in." Her words tumbled out fast, barely coherent, slurred with panic. Dad tried to calm her, asking who was after her, what happened if she was hurt, or if she needed an ambulance. But she kept repeating herself. "He's coming. Please call the police. Please help me." Mom was already on the phone with 911, her tone steady and clipped in that practiced way she used during emergencies. Outside, the woman's crying deepened into these harsh, broken sobs that filled the hallway. Then she suddenly went quiet. In a trembling whisper, she said, "Oh God, I hear his car. He found me. He found me again." Dad shut the door immediately and locked every bolt. "Get away from the windows," he ordered. A second later, she began pounding on the door, screaming now, begging us not to leave her outside. It was a horrible sound. Raw terror, like someone being hunted. Mom was still explaining everything to the dispatcher, saying we needed officers right away. Through all the chaos, I didn't hear any car engine. No headlights swept past our windows. Still, the woman screamed, ran across the porch and tugged at the windows, desperate to get in. We heard her footsteps, bare, frantic, scraping against the boards. Dad grabbed the baseball bat from the closet and stood ready between us and the door. Then, suddenly, silence. Only Mom's voice on the phone. Seconds later came a scream. Not fearful but furious, and the pounding of feet racing away across the porch and into the gravel driveway. Ignoring Dad's warning, I darted to the side window. In the silvery moonlight, I caught a glimpse of her running toward the tree line behind our house, the blue gown flowing like a trail of mist. She was fast, too fast for someone so distraught, and vanished into the woods within seconds. The police arrived about 8 minutes later. 2 cars, lights flashing red and blue, officers sweeping flashlights across our porch and yard. They found streaks of blood on the steps and faint footprints in the dirt leading toward the woods. My parents gave their statements while I sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The officers split up, 2 heading into the forest, 2 staying to search the yard. We waited in the living room, coffee cups untouched, every sound amplified by our nerves. After nearly 40 minutes, the officers returned shaking their heads. They'd followed the prints until they vanished near the creek. No woman, no sign of struggle. They radioed for backup in a K9 unit, expanding the search perimeter. Dad kept pacing, checking the locks again and again. None of it made sense. Why would someone begging for help run into the woods barefoot? One officer suggested maybe she was a domestic abuse victim acting erratically, terrified yet unwilling to fully escape. But something about her stillness, her sudden rage, her vanishing, it didn't feel like panic. It felt wrong. At around 4 in the morning, a detective knocked on our door, his expression grave. They'd found a car about 3 miles away, crashed deep into a ravine off the old service road parallel to the forest. A silver sedan totaled. Inside were 2 bodies, a man in his 30s behind the wheel, and a woman in the passenger seat. Both had been dead for hours, likely since before midnight. The woman's description matched who we'd seen. Same hair color, same build, same pale blue clothing. But the part that left everyone speechless, both bodies were still buckled in, and there was no sign anyone else had ever been in the car. The blood evidence confirmed they died on impact. There was no physical way either of them could have left that vehicle alive, much less come to our doorstep. The detective questioned us again, asking every detail we remembered. Forensics came to take samples of the blood from our porch and photograph the prints. Then Mom remembered the doorbell camera. We'd completely forgotten it during the chaos. The footage was grainy but clear enough you could see the woman sitting on our steps, standing to pound on the door, then running toward the woods. The time stamped 12:47 a.m. But the coroner said the crash happened around 11 p.m., almost 2 hours earlier. The detective kept asking if maybe we'd seen someone else, another person nearby. But no, we all saw the same woman, heard the same pleading voice. The search continued for several days. Tracking dogs found nothing, no torn clothing, no further blood, no trace beyond our yard. Eventually, the victims were identified as a couple from a nearby town driving home from a Halloween party. The man had been over the legal alcohol limit, likely lost control, and veered off the road. Authorities ruled it an accident, though no one could explain the rest. The blood on our porch matched the female victim from the car. Forensics couldn't explain how. After weeks of investigation, the case was closed, classified as an accident with unexplained anomalies. 6 months later, we moved. Not because we were terrified, but because that porch, those steps, had become unbearable to look at. We couldn't shake the memory of her voice, that desperate knocking, or the echo of her running into the trees. Even now, years later, I still wake some nights thinking I hear it again. 3 slow knocks, a pause, then 3 more. College parties start to blur together after enough weekends, yet that October night at the old house on Alder Lane carved itself into my mind like a burn that never heals. I was midway through junior year at Central Valley University, slogging through macro problem sets and living off ramen and canned caffeine like every other strapped undergrad. My roommate Noah Carter and I had been glued together since orientation, one of those day one bonds that felt inevitable. Noah could befriend anyone. He'd step into a room full of strangers and walk out with 5 new numbers and 3 tentative plans. He was the kind of person who'd hand you his last 20 knowing you might forget to pay him back, who would cross the city at 3 a.m. to rescue you when your ride vanished, who sensed the exact moment you needed a catastrophically bad joke to crack the pressure of finals. We'd weathered everything in those first 2 years. Bombed midterms, surprisingly great weekends, and that cursed spring break drive when his sedan died in the middle of nowhere. That particular Saturday, we headed to what everyone swore would be the blowout of the semester, hosted by a set of seniors renting a relic that looked untouched since the 70s. Noah and I got there around 10, dressed as matching zombies, thrift store outfits shredded with scissors and drenched in sticky stage blood that smeared onto anything we brushed. The place was unhinged the moment we stepped inside. Easily 200 people jammed wall to wall, air thick with fog machine haze and body heat, until breathing felt like a chore. The seniors had remodeled the space into a discount-haunted club, seizure bait strobe in the ex-living room, a kitchen reborn as a free-for-all bar where drinks were mixed with pure audacity, cotton cobwebs and plastic bones dangling from doorways and fixtures. The basement, though, was the magnet. They'd turned it into an ultraviolet grotto, concrete walls painted in neon splatters that glowed like toxic runoff in the dark. Getting down there meant shoving through a sweating traffic jam on a staircase, so narrow you turned sideways, everyone holding cups above their heads like umbrellas while the temperature jumped with each step. Hitting the floor felt like walking into a sauna. The subwoofer's bass rattled your ribs like loose change. Bodies were so tight you moved as one breathing creature. Near midnight, Noah and I were pressed to the back wall between tracks, trying to gulp air. The careful makeup we'd applied earlier had slipped into gray rivers, leaving us more melting wax than undead. Noah had spent an hour dancing with a vampire girl before she vanished upstairs with friends, so we pivoted to clownish moves just to crack me up. The crowd got rowdier by the minute, people climbing onto shoulders, booze arcing through the air, glow-in-the-dark silly strings suddenly streaking across the room. Noah leaned in and yelled that he needed air, the heat spinning him, and started angling toward what looked like an exit tucked in the corner. I nodded and turned back to the mass, assuming he'd be back in 5 like always. There were so many bodies crammed together that when someone pushed from behind, the whole pack lurched forward like falling tiles. By the time I glanced back to track Noah's path, he'd already dissolved into the press of people. 20 minutes ticked by, then 30, and still no sign of him. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe he'd bumped into friends upstairs, drifted into a conversation, or joined that bathroom line that spooled down the hallway. I muscled up the basement steps, each rise cooler than the last, my soaked shirt turning clammy. The main level was just as crowded but less stifling, people sprawled over couches, couples tucked into corners, a beer pong bracket blooming in the former dining room. I swept the kitchen, the back porch choked with smokers, even loitered outside the bathroom for 10 minutes in case he was in there puking. I asked around for a tall zombie, but there were at least 30 of those roaming the place. The unsettling part was his phone shooting straight to voicemail, no ring, just immediate dead end, like it was off or bricked. That wasn't him. Noah answered text mid-shower and carried a pocket charger like a talisman. He never let his battery die. By 1 in the morning, my nerves were fraying. I'd lapped the house twice and plunged back into the basement, trying to convince myself I'd somehow missed him in the crush. The party still pulsed, but my brain could focus on only one thing: find Noah. I grabbed Mark, a guy from down our dorm hall, and told him my roommate was gone. He jumped in to help. We cleared the place systematically, every bedroom and closet. The patchy backyard where someone had a trash can bonfire blazing. Mark floated the idea that Noah had disappeared with someone, but that didn't track. He would have texted, would have sent one of his cursed emoji strings, would have said he was heading out. His car was still parked where we'd left it 3 blocks away. I sprinted over, hoping he'd retreated to sleep it off. The windows were fogged from the cold, but I could see he wasn't inside. The magnetic box with the spare key still clung under the wheel well. I hunted down the host, a senior named Lucas Reed I'd met once, and asked whether there were other basement exits anywhere Noah might have slipped for a breath. Lucas stared at me like I'd lost it, pupils huge, clearly several drinks past reasonable. He said the basement had one entrance, the skinny stairs everybody used, and that the corner door had been locked and barricaded for months. When I insisted that Noah had headed right for that corner, Lucas bristled. That area was off limits, he said. They'd piled boxes and junked furniture there to keep drunks from messing with it. But I could picture Noah weaving through the bodies, hand raised in that half wave of his, steering straight for that spot. Lucas shifted from annoyed to hostile, asking why I was stirring trouble, suggesting my friend probably bailed with someone and I needed to relax and stop pointing fingers. The music still hammered from below, but suddenly it felt predatory, like the tempo of something awful unfolding just beyond vision. Mark and I went back down one more time, phone flashlights cutting through the ultraviolet to see that corner for real. The crowd had thinned enough to let us edge to the rear wall. Boxes were stacked there, old water-swollen cardboard with ripped edges, and a ruined couch flipped upright. Looking closer, I noticed fresh scrape lines on the concrete, as if something heavy had been dragged not long ago. The dust told the same story. Clean rectangles marked where boxes had sat forever, but they didn't align with where the stack was currently. Someone had shifted everything recently, maybe tonight. Mark caught it too and tugged at a box to peek behind, but Lucas materialized with 2 bigger guys and told us to leave. They weren't asking. Hands clamped on our arms, steering us to the stairs. Lucas tossed out something about calling the cops if we didn't get out immediately, that we were killing the vibe and spooking guests. They literally dumped us on the front porch. Mark stumbled and almost ate the steps. I tried one more time to say my closest friend was missing, that something was wrong, but Lucas stood in the doorway with his arms folded, friendly host drained away and replaced by something cold. He said Noah probably found a hookup and dipped. It happened constantly, and if I returned or stirred the pot again, he'd make sure campus security heard about it. The door slammed. The bolt clicked. We were on the sidewalk in the brittle October air, while the party throbbed on without us. Mark wanted to bail. Said we should wait until morning when people sobered up. But those scrape marks kept looping in my head. I called Noah 50 times, shot out text after text, even started to dial his mom before hanging up, because what would I say? He vanished at a party and the host was acting shady? The police would chalk it up to drunken stupidity or a hookup gone long. I stayed until 4 a.m., planted in my car across the street, watching the trickle of people drain out as the night burned down. Every time the door opened, my pulse kicked, expecting Noah, but it never was. Around 3:30, I watched Lucas and his roommates hustle garbage bags to the curb, moving quick and quiet like they wanted no witnesses. One bag ruptured when it hit, and what looked like clothes spilled onto the sidewalk. They scooped everything up fast and shoved it into another bag before I could get a better look. The basement light stayed on long after the upstairs windows went dark. Shadows slid across the grimy ground-level panes, but the glass was so painted and dirty that I couldn't make out anything. My phone died near dawn, and I finally drove back to campus with my brain racing through every theory. Maybe he'd gotten sick and someone took him to urgent care. Maybe he had an allergic flare to something. Maybe there was a back egress I didn't know about, and he left without the car. Sunday morning, I filed a missing person report with campus police, though they clearly didn't buy the urgency. The officer kept asking if Noah had been drinking, if we'd argued, if he had a habit of vanishing. I gave them Lucas's name and address, laid out the sealed corner, the weird behavior, the fact that Noah's car hadn't moved. It wasn't until I pointed out he had a midterm Monday, that he never missed exams, had perfect attendance, that they agreed to do a welfare check. I rode along, wedged in the back of the cruiser to Alder Lane, stomach roiling with hope and dread. By daylight the house looked smaller, shabbier, with Halloween junk sagging from the porch rails. Lucas opened the door bleary and annoyed, then flipped to cooperative the second he saw badges. Suddenly he was worried too, eager to help, explaining how these parties got out of hand and people wandered. They combed the main floors first while Lucas hovered, insisting hundreds had flowed through the place and it would be impossible to track everyone. When they stepped toward the basement, I saw his jaw harden as they approached the box-choked corner. He said it was storage, blocked for months due to water damage. No one could have gotten back there during the party. But the older officer, a woman with eyes like razor wire, spotted the same scrape marks and told Lucas to move the boxes. He protested, said it was hazardous and the landlord had ordered that area off limits. But they insisted. It took 10 minutes to clear the heap, Lucas growing jumpier with each piece dragged aside. His roommates gathered at the top of the stairs, watching like they'd swallowed nails. Behind the debris was a door just as I'd suspected, but heavier than I'd pictured. Thick wood braced with metal, a fresh padlock winking on the latch. Lucas claimed he had no key, that the landlord must have locked it, that it probably led to old heating gear. The officers had him call the landlord on the spot. As we waited, I noticed one roommate slip upstairs, phone already in his hand. The landlord arrived within 20 minutes, a jittery older man named Walter Green, who kept drying his palms on his jeans. He fumbled through a ring of keys for what felt like forever before the right one clicked, his hands shaking as he worked the padlock free. The door opened onto wooden steps sinking into a deeper dark, well below the basement, and a smell rolled up that made everyone recoil. Damp, metallic, wrong. The cops went first, flashlights slicing the black, while we hovered above. Lucas went silent, face ashy. I could hear movement and voices bouncing in strange echoes, and then one officer shouted for everyone to back away, not to come closer. The older officer climbed fast, radio already in her hand, calling for backup and crime scene techs, her face bloodless. She wouldn't tell me what they'd found, just repeated that we needed to wait outside, that it was now an active scene. But I heard her tell the dispatcher they'd uncovered an old storm shelter recently accessed, with visible blood and a single brown leather sneaker matching what Noah wore. Within an hour, the street was cinched in yellow tape, detectives and forensics swarming the place. They cuffed Lucas and his 3 roommates and put them in separate patrol cars while the team processed the house. I sat on the curb across the street for hours watching evidence bags stream out, each one draining another measure of hope. Finally, a detective named Laura Park sat beside me, and a careful voice outlined what they knew. The shelter dated to the 50s, Cold War concrete, a bunker old tenants had used for storage until it was supposedly sealed 5 years ago. But Lucas and his crew had found it when they moved in, and had been using it for something the detective wouldn't specify, something soundproofed with a new ventilation line. They'd found signs of someone being held there, restraints, scuffed concrete, arcs of blood on the wall. Noah's shoe was there, along with his wallet and phone, smashed to shards. They were still searching, she said. The shelter connected to the city's old maintenance corridors. Maybe Noah had escaped that way, or been moved. The truth surfaced 3 days later when one roommate, Ryan Ellis, cracked and cut a deal. They'd been running a clandestine fighting ring in the shelter, luring drunk students downstairs to brawl while others bet on outcomes. When Noah went hunting for that corner exit, he glimpsed something through a gap in the stacked boxes he shouldn't have seen. They panicked, grabbed him, and dragged him down to decide their next move. Noah fought harder than they expected. In the chaos, he broke free and bolted deeper into the tunnels, and they lost him in the maintenance maze. Search crews spent 2 weeks combing those corridors with dogs and thermal cameras, and eventually found him about a mile from the house alive, barely. He'd wandered 3 days in dead blackness, fallen down a shaft and snapped his leg, survived on condensation beating on pipes. He'd shed a frightening amount of weight and couldn't stop trembling for weeks, but he lived, and that eclipsed everything else. Lucas took 15 years for kidnapping and illegal gambling. The roommates got lighter sentences for cooperating. The university shut down off-campus house parties for the rest of the year, and the Alder Lane relic was condemned and bulldozed by spring. Noah spent a month relearning how to walk in physical therapy and another 3 months in counseling, trying to unknot the horror of being entombed in dark. He never talks about what he saw in that shelter before he ran. His eyes just drift away and he swaps the subject. We're still roommates, still best friends. But something fundamental shifted that night. We learned how quickly a normal student party can mutate into something predatory, how the ones pouring your drinks could be hiding something monstrous right below your feet. Noah graduated in May and landed an accounting job downtown, and I'm finishing my senior year now. But neither of us goes near house parties anymore. Noah still keeps a nightlight on. He still catalogs every door in a room the moment he walks in, mapping exits. Sometimes I catch him staring at nothing, thumb grazing the scar on his leg where the bone punched through, and I know he's back down there in the tunnels, sprinting through that blind labyrinth, still trying to find the way out. Frank Dawson's Halloween setups were infamous along Willow Bend Lane, the kind of neighborhood spectacle real estate agents mentioned to potential buyers. Each October, Frank transformed his front yard into something straight out of a horror movie backlot, entirely out of place on a quiet Portland cul-de-sac. His mannequins were so lifelike that delivery drivers refused to walk up to his porch after dusk, leaving packages near the sidewalk instead. His homemade blood mixture had this thick, glossy sheen that never fully dried, smeared across the concrete like someone had dragged a wounded body toward his garage. He used motion-activated shrieks, strobes buried in shrubs, and a fog machine that cloaked the lawn in rolling mist whenever anyone passed by, turning the whole place into a crime scene fever dream. The locals had grown used to it, treating his obsession as part of the neighborhood's quirky charm. Families would stroll by during the day for a harmless scare. Teenagers would dare each other to touch the corpse he always placed half-buried beneath his porch, and even the cops had stopped responding to panicked 911 calls from visitors unfamiliar with his tradition. Frank worked construction by day, but once October hit, every spare moment was devoted to perfecting his macabre masterpiece, adding new elements he'd been crafting since January. The previous year, he introduced something particularly disturbing. A mannequin posed as a jogger sprawled across his lawn, earbuds still dangling, sneakers on as if attacked mid-run. He'd gone as far as adding sweat stains to the shirt and dirt smudges on the knees. This year, though, Frank began unusually early, dragging his bins out on October 1st instead of waiting until mid-month. From my living room window, I watched him transform the yard into a full-blown crime scene. Yellow tape, numbered evidence markers beside puddles of that glistening fake blood, and bodies arranged at odd, contorted angles. But the central piece this year made me pause mid-sip of my coffee. Under the glow of a spotlight stood what looked like a businessman, face down on the grass, arm outstretched toward the curb as though crawling for help. The navy pinstriped suit, the briefcase splayed open beside him, the scattered paperwork, even the tipped-over coffee cup dripping onto the pages. It all looked alarmingly fresh. Usually, Frank's displays had a theatrical flair, fake though convincing. But this one felt different. The fabric had creases that matched the body's positioning. The shoes bore worn soles, and when the wind blew, the jacket fluttered with an uncanny realism. Frank spent hours fine-tuning the scene, shifting papers slightly, nudging the briefcase, and standing back like a painter studying his canvas. When he finally retreated indoors, I couldn't stop staring at that figure, unsettled by how disturbingly authentic it appeared. 3 days later, the odor began. At first, I thought he'd gone overboard with some kind of rotting flesh effect. The unseasonably warm weather, mid-70s when it should have been cool, didn't help. The air carried a thick, sickly sweet stench across my yard, forcing me to shut my windows despite the heat. Other neighbors did the same. Mrs. Galinsky, 2 houses down, even came by asking if I knew what Frank was using this year. Her beagle refused to go near his house, whining and tugging away on walks. The mail carrier began dropping his deliveries at the curb instead of the door slot. Frank, unfazed, spent each evening on his porch with a beer in hand, admiring his yard like an artist satisfied with his masterpiece, smiling and waving at anyone passing by, completely unaware that people were now hurrying past with their shirts over their faces. On October 4th, I decided to confront him. I caught him crouched near the businessman figure, adjusting the scattered pages. The stench slammed into me as I approached, eye-watering and nauseating, nothing like the synthetic Halloween scents from stores. When I brought it up, Frank laughed it off, saying he'd ordered a new decomposition spray online, some hyper-realistic military-grade training stuff used by cleanup crews. Standing that close, I noticed other disturbing details. There was a wedding band on the figure's left hand, a tungsten ring that caught the sunlight, a wristwatch ticked faintly, the second hand clearly moving. The hair, streaked gray at the temples, was too natural to be synthetic. Individual strands swayed lightly in the breeze. When I commented on how unnervingly real it looked, Frank frowned, confused, and told me he hadn't bought any new props that year, only rearranged old ones. That didn't add up. I'd seen every one of his displays for the past 5 years, and I'd never seen this mannequin before. He shrugged off my questions, though his glance lingered on the figure, puzzled, as if he couldn't remember how it got there. That night, I couldn't sleep. The smell had intensified, and unease kept gnawing at me. Around 2 a.m. I peered through my bedroom window at Frank's yard. The streetlight carved long shadows across the display, and from my second-story view, I could see the suited figure clearly. Maybe exhaustion was tricking me, but it looked different. The outstretched arm seemed closer to the sidewalk than before. I snapped a picture with my phone, telling myself it was just paranoia. But the next morning, when I compared the photo to the real view, the arm had definitely shifted. Later that day, I asked Frank if he'd been out there moving things during the night. He stared at me blankly and said no. Why would he be outside at 2 a.m.? October 5th was when everything came undone. I was grading papers at my kitchen table when the commotion began. Dogs barking, doors slamming, people shouting. Through the window, I saw Mrs. Galinsky's beagle had broken free and sprinted straight into Frank's yard, barking wildly at the businessman display, pawing at it, trying to bite something. Mrs. Galinsky screamed for her dog, but she wouldn't step onto Frank's property. Frank rushed outside, yelling at the dog to get away, but when he reached down to grab its collar, he froze. His face went pale as he stared at what the dog had dragged loose, a wallet. He picked it up with trembling hands, flipped it open, and I could see him mouthing, "Oh God," over and over. Within 20 minutes, police cars filled the street, then a van, then men and women in different uniforms stringing up real crime scene tape that looked identical to Frank's fake kind. They blocked off his entire yard. From my porch, I caught bits of radio chatter. Missing person. The name was Robert Henley, an insurance adjuster who'd vanished 6 days earlier. His wife had reported him missing on October 2nd after he never made it home from work. Watching the officers photographing every inch of Frank's yard, measuring distances, and examining props, I could tell they suspected him. Frank kept repeating that he'd found all his mannequins already arranged when he began setting up on October 1st. He thought someone had added a few extras as a prank. He swore he had no idea one of them wasn't fake. The coroner's report confirmed what the smell had already told us. Robert Henley had been dead roughly 6 days, killed somewhere else, then deliberately positioned in Frank's yard the night of September 30th. Later, detectives found security footage from a neighbor's camera showing a van pulling up at 3 a.m. on October 1st. A figure dressed in dark clothing dragged something heavy onto Frank's lawn, spending 15 minutes arranging it among his decorations. Whoever it was had studied Frank's habits, replicating his signature setup, yellow tape, blood pools, evidence markers to make the body blend in perfectly. The van turned out to be stolen and was found torched 2 counties away a week later. The case went cold. No enemies, no insurance scams, no hidden debts. Just a normal guy who sold insurance, coached Little League, and ended up as part of a Halloween display for nearly a week before anyone noticed. The day after police cleared the scene, Frank tore everything down. I helped him haul boxes to the dump, thousands of dollars worth of props he couldn't bear to look at again. By January, he'd moved to Arizona, where Halloween wasn't much of a thing. The new family that bought his house probably wonders why no one on our block decorates anymore. Every October, the porch lights stay off and the street grows silent. That holiday spirit died with what happened on Willow Bend Lane. And whenever I catch that same thick, sweet scent, roadkill, spoiled meat, whatever it is, I'm back in that moment watching Frank realize he'd been proudly displaying a corpse for 5 days, admiring how lifelike it looked this year. Every house along Birchwood Lane had installed surveillance cameras after the string of burglaries 2 summers earlier, which is the only reason what unfolded that night was captured from multiple perspectives. Ever since my divorce, living alone had pushed me into a routine so familiar it almost felt mechanical. I worked late shifts at a shipping facility just outside Davenport, Iowa, wrapping up near midnight before taking the same road home 5 nights a week. I was 32, not old by any means, but old enough to appreciate predictability after the emotional wreckage of a failed marriage. Halloween in 2017 fell on a Tuesday, and the warehouse crew had gone all out decorating the loading dock with glow-in-the-dark skeletons from the dollar store. We passed around miniature candy bars during breaks, complained about the new barcode scanners freezing up, and made the usual jokes about working while kids were out hauling pillowcases full of candy. Everything about that night felt normal, banal, even, until the clock hit 12:03, and I walked out to my car. Davenport tends to fall silent after midnight, but that drive home felt eerily deserted. And I don't mean the usual quiet of an Iowa night. It was unsettling, empty in a way that made my skin itch. Normally, the campus district had a few students staggering between bars on Halloween, but the streets were void of life. It was like the entire city had received a warning to stay inside, and I was the only one who hadn't. The 20-minute trip dragged on, my headlights slicing through thick fog drifting up from the river. Every home I passed had porch lights burning bright, those universal signs that trick-or-treaters were welcome, but it was far too late for any to still be out. The McDonald's by the intersection was pitch black. The gas station that proudly claimed to never close had its pumps shut off. Even the usual police cruiser stationed by the industrial park was gone. I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe there was a citywide event I'd missed, or maybe the weather alert had scared everyone indoors. Or maybe I was just exhausted. My driveway curved inward from the street. A long stretch of gravel lined by untrimmed cedar shrubs the previous owner had planted decades earlier. As my headlights rolled over the curve, the beams caught 2 figures at the very end, right where the gravel met the sidewalk. They stood completely still, facing me. Each wore an old-fashioned clown mask, not the flimsy party store kind, but the heavy rubber type with wild orange hair, oversized red noses, and stretched smiles that seemed unnaturally wide. One was tall, maybe 6'3", dressed in grimy blue coveralls smeared with dark stains. The other, a few inches shorter, wore a faded yellow raincoat, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. They didn't move or speak, just stood there like mannequins placed by some sadistic decorator. I assumed it was college kids being stupid. Davenport had plenty of them, and I even chuckled, grabbing my phone to snap a photo for my coworkers. Check out these idiots, I thought. But as I neared, my headlights revealed more detail. The tall one held a sledgehammer. Not a fake one, not foam or plastic, but a real one. Wooden handle worn smooth, metal head dark with use. The shorter one's hands were empty but positioned strangely at stomach height, fingers splayed as if pressing against invisible glass. Neither shielded their eyes from my lights or shifted their stance. Through the rubber mask eye holes, I could see their real eyes, wide open, motionless, fixed on me. I stopped my car 15 feet away, engine still running, doors automatically locking. Logic told me this had to be a prank, but instinct said otherwise. Something about how they stood felt rehearsed. I flicked on the high beams, drowning them in light. Still no reaction. Then I started noticing more. The tall one's knees were caked in fresh mud, as if he'd been kneeling somewhere. The sledgehammer's head glistened with something wet and dark, not rust. The raincoat had 3 neat rips along the hem, like it had been clawed. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 while keeping my gaze on them. The dispatcher's calm female voice came through quickly. "What's your emergency?" she asked. "2 people in clown masks are standing in my driveway," I said. "One's holding a sledgehammer. They're not moving. I can't leave my car." She asked for my address, which I rattled off. Before I could answer her next question, both clowns tilted their heads to the left, simultaneously, perfectly synchronized. The movement was so abrupt I flinched against the steering wheel. "They're moving," I said into the phone. My voice trembled now. "Please send someone fast." The dispatcher assured me officers were on the way and told me to keep my doors locked and stay on the line. The tall clown began rhythmically tapping the hammer's head against his palm. The sound carried through the closed windows, slow, deliberate. The shorter one started swaying from foot to foot, fingers curling into fists. Then together they started walking toward my car, not running, walking. Every step controlled and purposeful. I narrated what I saw into the phone, each word tighter than the last. They're about 10 feet away. The tall one's lifting the hammer. I slammed the gear into reverse, tires screeching over gravel as I backed up. But the driveway's curve made it impossible to see clearly, and panic clouded my judgment. I clipped one of the cedar bushes oversteered and ended up half on my front lawn. The car stalled. I could hear the crunch of their footsteps approaching. The dispatcher's voice cut through, saying the police were 3 minutes away. Those 3 minutes might as well have been hours. I restarted the car just as the sledgehammer came down on my hood. The metallic impact rang out like a gunshot, denting the steel right in front of me. The shorter one pressed both palms flat against my window, smearing dirt and oil as they dragged downward. Under the porch light, I could see grime under the nails, cuts across the knuckles, and on one finger a gold wedding band. Somehow that single detail made it infinitely worse. It made them real, as they laughed, soft, muffled chuckles leaking from behind rubber. The panic in me ignited. I reversed again, forcing them back and fishtailing onto the street. The dispatcher asked if I could drive to the station, but I wasn't about to leave my property. Instead, I pulled into my neighbor Ben's driveway across the street. He was the guy who went all out on decorations every Halloween. I parked there, headlights aimed at my house, ready to floor it if they followed. From that angle, I watched them through the windshield. They stood in my yard, looking at each other as if communicating silently. Then the shorter one went to my mailbox, the sturdy metal one my ex had insisted we buy, and the taller followed. The tall one swung the sledgehammer twice, clean and fast, snapping the post in half. The clang echoed down the street. Not one neighbor came out. No lights flicked on from the Jacksons' house next door, even though their baby usually woke to any noise. Doug, 2 houses down, the guy who worked night security, didn't step out either. Every home stayed eerily still, porch lights glowing, but blinds closed. The clowns walked calmly down the road and stopped in front of the Jacksons' driveway. The shorter one reached into the raincoat and pulled out something metallic, probably a screwdriver, and in quick, precise movements deflated all 4 tires of their minivan. The hiss carried through the cold air. Meanwhile, the tall one used the sledgehammer to smash their collection of garden gnomes, each shattering with a single swing. Then they moved to Doug's place, the taller caving in his truck's windshield while the other messed with his porch. The dispatcher said the officers were less than a minute away, but the clowns didn't care. Every few houses they'd pause and look straight back at me, tilting their heads in perfect unison again. They wanted me to see this, to witness every second. The quiet was worse than the destruction. The only sounds were distant laughter and the dull crunch of impact. Finally, blue and red lights glowed at the far end of the street. 2 squad cars sped toward them, sirens off but lights flashing. The clowns stood before the Petersons' house, 6 doors down from mine, and when the lights hit them, they froze. No panic, no attempt to flee, just stillness. The cars stopped, blocking them in. Officers stepped out, weapons drawn, shouting commands. The tall one dropped the hammer with a metallic thud that broke the spell over the neighborhood. Suddenly porch lights flickered on everywhere, doors opening, people spilling out in robes, whispering and pointing. Ben ran out to his driveway where I sat idling, asking what happened, why I was in his carport, what had happened to my hood. I couldn't respond, just gestured toward the officers cuffing the 2 clowns, masks still on. The police took my statement that night and again the next morning. Turned out the men were brothers, Aaron and Daniel Frey, from a small town 40 miles north, ages 26 and 29. They had driven into Davenport with a trunk full of tools and refused to explain why. During questioning, they didn't speak at all. No lawyers, no excuses, no emotion. Detectives later told me they'd found my address scribbled on a folded sheet of paper in their car, along with 3 others from neighboring cities. None of us were connected in any way, no shared acquaintances, jobs, or history. They eventually pled guilty to vandalism and menacing charges, sentenced to 18 months, served 8. I never got an answer about why they chose Birchwood Lane, or why they stood waiting for me, or why they wanted me to watch them wreck the neighborhood. Footage from multiple cameras showed them arriving at 11:47, standing motionless at the end of my driveway for 13 full minutes before I got home, never looking at each other, never checking a phone, just waiting. Sometimes I still see those masks in dreams, their perfect symmetry, that silent head tilt, the flash of a wedding band catching the light. 3 months later, I sold the house and moved into an apartment near work, one with underground parking and a 24-hour guard. But every Halloween, when I see clown masks in store aisles or kids dressed in those old rubber costumes, I think about that night and wonder if Aaron and Daniel Frey are somewhere out there waiting at the end of someone else's driveway. The final trick-or-treater came to my doorstep, dressed as a video game character I couldn't name. I emptied the rest of my candy bars into his pillowcase just to be done with it. My legs ached from standing for nearly 3 hours, and the inflatable T-Rex costume I'd been wearing trapped heat like an oven. Once the porch light was off and the door locked, I collapsed onto the couch and pulled out my phone to order something to eat. The refrigerator held nothing but expired yogurt and a few beers, and Romano's was the only pizza spot still delivering this late on Halloween night. Their app lagged endlessly, freezing between screens, but after a few frustrating minutes, my order finally went through: 1 large pepperoni, a side of garlic knots, and a 2-liter of cola. The screen promised 45 minutes. I stripped off that sweaty dinosaur suit and jumped in the shower, assuming I had time to spare. Just as I was tugging a shirt over my still damp shoulders, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could make out a tall man wearing a cracked skull mask and holding what appeared to be a delivery bag. It didn't strike me as strange. I'd seen a few costume delivery drivers earlier that evening while passing out candy. When I opened the door, though, he didn't speak. He stood there perfectly still, head tilted slightly, studying me through those hollow sockets. The bag he held was plain black, no logo, none of Romano's usual red insulated branding I'd seen countless times before. He wore a scuffed leather jacket over a dark hoodie, and his jeans were stained with what looked like mud or oil. After an uncomfortably long pause, he rasped out in a harsh whisper, "$24.50. The voice hardly sounded human. I handed him $30 and told him to keep the change, just wanting him gone. Instead of leaving, he fished a wrinkled piece of paper from his jacket pocket and smoothed it against his thigh before offering it to me. His hands were covered in thick mechanic's gloves, and something dark was caked under the nails. The receipt was blank white paper, my order printed in a generic font, no restaurant name, phone number, or address. When I glanced up to question it, he was already walking away, but not toward any visible car in my driveway. Across the street sat a dented gray sedan I didn't recognize, no delivery sign, no company decals. He climbed inside and sat motionless, engine off, staring in my direction. I could almost feel his gaze behind that skull mask. The pizza tasted normal, maybe slightly cold, but unease hung over me like a fog. About 20 minutes later, I heard something faint outside, a dragging noise, metal scraping on concrete. My backyard motion light blinked on, flooding the patio in harsh white glare. Through the kitchen window, I saw nothing, and 30 seconds later, the light clicked off again. I fetched a flashlight from the junk drawer and checked the back door. It was locked, but the knob felt wet as if someone had gripped it with damp hands. Then came the scraping again, this time from the side of the house where I kept the trash bins. My neighbor's golden retriever erupted into frantic barking, snarling unlike I'd ever heard from that usually sweet dog. I turned off all my lights and crept to the living room window. Peering through the blinds, I saw the gray sedan was gone, leaving fresh tire tracks in the wet leaves. My heart pounded so hard it seemed to echo in my head. Then I saw him, or at least I thought I did, standing at the far edge of my property beneath a dim streetlight. The height and leather jacket were the same, but the skull mask was replaced by a black ski mask. He held something metallic in one hand, maybe a crowbar or tire iron, standing absolutely still, as though waiting for a signal. I snatched my phone to call 911, but the screen was frozen on Romano's app, the order still marked as pending, as if it hadn't been delivered at all. The sharp sound of breaking glass from the basement sent me into pure panic. I heard deliberate, careful footsteps descending there, each one placed slowly as if avoiding the squeaky steps, like someone who'd studied the house. When the phone finally unfroze, I managed to call 911, whispering frantically to the dispatcher while barricading myself inside the upstairs bathroom. The footsteps reached the main floor and paused near the basement door that led into the kitchen. Thankfully, the deadbolt I'd installed over the summer held firm. The dispatcher kept urging me to stay calm, assuring me that officers were en route, but I could hear the metallic scrape of tools working the lock. Then, nothing. Silence. Only my own ragged breathing in the tiny bathroom. I crouched in the bathtub, clutching a baseball bat I'd grabbed from my room. A siren wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder by the second. Then I heard hurried steps retreating down the basement and out through the broken window. By the time the police arrived minutes later, he was gone, leaving muddy boot prints across the floor and deep scratches along the deadbolt. The officers swept the house with weapons drawn while I stood outside wrapped in a blanket, dazed like someone in a crime documentary. Officer Kearns emerged holding an evidence bag with the crumpled receipt I'd left on the counter. He asked me to confirm the pizzeria's name. When I said Romano's, his expression changed. They had called the restaurant, no record of my order, no driver matching my description, and their final delivery had gone out at 9:10, nearly an hour before my supposed pizza arrived. What followed only made things worse. My security camera, which I'd completely forgotten about, had recorded everything in grainy black and white. The man had circled my house for half an hour before knocking, testing windows and doors, even lifting my garage door just enough to look inside. At one chilling moment, he stood directly beneath the camera and looked up, that skull mask filling the entire frame as if letting me know he was aware of being watched. Investigators uncovered something else, a receipt from a hardware store, time-stamped that same afternoon, caught against my fence by the wind. It listed gloves, a crowbar, and zip ties. While reviewing the footage, one officer pointed out something I'd missed, a second figure sitting inside that gray sedan. Little more than a shadow, but definitely there. Detective Salinas, the woman assigned to my case, sat across from me later at the station, exhaustion written on her face. She explained that these men had been targeting houses all October, using fake food deliveries to scout people living alone. Once they'd studied a target, they returned later for break-ins. Halloween had given them cover. Costumes and masks were everywhere. She showed me 3 similar reports from nearby neighborhoods, though mine was the only one where they'd attempted entry that same night. The pizza itself was probably genuine, she said, likely purchased from a random shop across town, to make their act seem real enough that no one would call the police right away. What chilled me most was learning they'd found matching boot prints 2 streets over at an older man's house who'd ordered Chinese food around 8 that night. Officer Kearns came back with mugshots on a laptop asking if I recognized anyone, but how could I? The man never revealed his face. They had me recount every detail multiple times, each version pulling up new fragments, the tilt of his head, the labored breathing through the mask, the chemical scent on his clothes, like engine oil mixed with something harsher. It was close to 2 in the morning when they finished gathering evidence and photographing everything. Detective Salinas advised me to stay elsewhere for a few nights, even though patrols would increase. My sister lived about 40 minutes away in Kelmont, so I called her from the station lot, struggling to explain without terrifying her. I stayed with her for a week, barely sleeping, jumping at every delivery truck that passed. When I finally returned home, I had an advanced security system installed, cameras on every corner, motion sensors sensitive enough to catch a moth, and a video doorbell linked to my phone. The police never caught those men, or at least they never told me if they did. The break-in stopped right after Halloween, disappearing without trace. 2 weeks later, Salinas called to say they'd found the gray sedan abandoned in a downtown parking garage, stripped clean except for a pile of counterfeit restaurant receipts and a box of cheap skull masks. Months later, my neighbor mentioned seeing someone in his yard that same night, tugging on his shed door, but he'd assumed it was drunk teenagers pulling pranks. Even now, years later, I refuse to have food delivered to my house. I either pick it up myself or meet drivers at a nearby gas station under bright lights and constant cameras. Every Halloween when the doorbell rings, even if it's clearly children in costumes, I have to pause and steady my breathing before opening the door. The detective was probably right. It was likely a traveling crew who moved on. Still, sometimes I wonder if that man in the skull mask ever drives past my house, remembering the one that got away, waiting for me to let my guard down and order pizza again. The baseball bat stays by my bed now, and I've memorized every creak and pop this house makes, so I'll know the instant something sounds off. Strangely enough, I later discovered Romano's had closed early that night, at 9 sharp, because their oven broke. Which means whoever handed me that pizza had gone through the trouble of buying it elsewhere just to make their twisted plan work. It was one of those brisk late October evenings when the air carried the scent of damp leaves and melting pumpkin candles. Both of my parents were working the overnight shift at Halloween, which meant it was just me and my younger brother, Ethan. He was 8, dressed as a little vampire whose plastic fangs kept slipping out, while I wore a crooked witch hat and an oversized sweatshirt. Our neighborhood wasn't fancy, but everyone loved decorating for the season. Cobwebs were draped across bushes, orange bulbs glowed from porches, and paper skeletons hung loosely from tree branches. It always felt safe, like the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. I'd grown up walking those same streets and thought I had the whole area memorized. We started trick-or-treating around 6, when the sky still had that faded violet hue, and kids were darting from house to house with plastic pumpkin buckets clinking with candy. Ethan kept tugging on my sleeve every few steps, pointing out houses with fog machines or shrieking animatronic ghosts. It all felt ordinary until I noticed the white van parked across from the Dempsey house. No lights, no decals, just plain white. Its windows were tinted darker than usual, and I couldn't tell if someone was sitting inside. I convinced myself it belonged to a guest or someone dropping by for the night. But about 20 minutes later, when we turned onto Ashbury Drive, there it was again, the same van, now sitting at the edge of the street near the corner. I tried to laugh it off, joking to Ethan that the same car must really love Halloween too, but he didn't even look up. He was too busy sorting through his candy. Still, my mind wouldn't stop connecting the dots. The van had never actually passed us. Somehow, it always ended up just one street ahead. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe there were 2 identical vans in the area. By the time we reached the last few houses, most of the younger kids had gone home, and the streets had gone quiet except for the hum of porch lights flickering as homeowners ran out of candy. That's when I saw it again, parked halfway down Alder Court, headlights off, angled toward us like it had just stopped mid-turn. I grabbed Ethan's hand and said we were heading home. He groaned, begging to visit one more house, but I didn't answer. Something about that van, the stillness, the way it seemed to wait, made the back of my neck sting in the cold. When our house finally came into view, the porch light glowed warmly, and I felt a wave of relief spread through me. Ethan sprinted ahead, eager to dump his candy onto the living room rug. Before stepping inside, I glanced back once more. The van rolled slowly past the corner, headlights still off, drifting by like it was searching for something. It didn't stop or speed up, just coasted silently until it disappeared behind the maple trees. I stayed on the porch pretending to check my phone so Ethan wouldn't notice how tense I felt. Dad came home not long after. He's the kind of man who keeps spreadsheets for everything, bills, groceries, even the neighborhood watch schedule. I told him about the van, expecting him to shrug it off, but instead he frowned and went straight for his laptop. Our neighborhood uses a shared camera system where motion-triggered feeds from certain houses link to a shared network. He started scrubbing through footage from earlier that night, fast-forwarding through timestamps as I stood beside him. The footage was grainy but clear enough to make out details. The van appeared first near the Dempsey place, then on Ashbury Drive, then again on Alder Court, each time parked for several minutes with its lights off before moving to the next street. Dad tried zooming in on the license plate, but the pixels blurred too much to read. He replayed one clip in slow motion, and that's when we both saw it. A tall shadow sitting in the driver's seat, wearing what looked like a baseball cap. No motion, just waiting. Dad immediately called the non-emergency police line, explained what we'd seen, and sent over the footage. While he was talking, I went to check on Ethan. I walked into his room trying to reassure him everything was fine, but when I looked through his window, the van was there again, parked 3 houses down. The headlights were dim but glowing faintly against the pavement, and I could feel that whoever was inside was watching our house. I closed the blinds without a word. About half an hour later, 2 police officers arrived. They walked along the street with flashlights, scanning the curbs, but the van was gone. They took Dad's statement, copied the footage onto a flash drive, and said they'd file a report. One of them mentioned that Halloween always draws odd traffic, though the way they exchanged looks told me they were taking it seriously. They left their card and promised to follow up. That night I barely slept. Every time a car passed by, the wet hiss of tires made me sit up to check the window. By morning, the neighborhood chat was flooded with messages. 3 families mentioned seeing the same van. One said it paused in front of their house while their kids were still outside. Another wrote that the driver rolled down the window to say something before speeding off. Soon neighbors began uploading their own camera clips. By noon, there were multiple recordings of the van stopping near different kids who were walking alone. No one managed to catch a clear view of the driver's face. 2 days later, Dad received a call from a detective. The van matched the description of one used in an attempted child abduction. A few towns over, same model, same dented back door, and a partial license plate that lined up. The suspect still hadn't been caught, but authorities were tracking him. When Dad told me, I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at Ethan's half-empty candy bucket, realizing just how close we had come to something horrific. It's the kind of danger you never believe will reach your family until it nearly does. Even now, years later, Halloween feels different. I still walk Ethan, no longer a kid, around the block, but I can't help scanning every car that passes. I know most people are just out living their normal lives, but that night taught me something I'll never unlearn. The worst monsters aren't always the ones in masks. They're the ones waiting quietly on the corner, blending into the dark, hoping you stop paying attention. There are nights that etch themselves into your memory so deeply they become part of you, and that Halloween became exactly that. I had been planning it for weeks, a simple evening out with my 8-year-old son, Aiden. He was endlessly energetic and couldn't stop talking about his pirate costume. We lived in a calm suburb where everyone recognized each other, the kind of neighborhood where neighbors waved as you passed, and kids roamed free until the streetlights buzzed on. I remember adjusting the strap on his plastic sword before we headed out, his little hands gripping that pumpkin-shaped candy pail with pride. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of damp leaves and the synthetic fog that drifted through the streets. Every porch glowed in shades of orange, and the entire neighborhood shimmered with that soft, electric thrill only Halloween can bring. We moved from house to house, Aiden laughing whenever he tripped over his costume or shouted thank you through his cheap plastic mask. He kept showing me how full his bucket was getting, proud of the weight. After a while, we merged into a small parade of families walking along the main road, children zigzagging through lawns while parents followed behind, chatting about work or school. Everything felt so normal, almost unnervingly safe. Then we reached the house at the corner, the one decked out with flashing strobes and foam gravestones, and that's when it happened. I turned briefly to greet a neighbor, a man I'd seen walking his golden retriever many times before, but when I looked back, Aiden was gone. I called for him, expecting he'd jump out from behind a bush, eager to scare me like he always did. When he didn't answer, the laughter of nearby kids began to blur into distant static. I searched the yard, the sidewalk, then started running toward the end of the block. He was nowhere. His candy bucket lay tipped near the curb, sweets scattered across the damp grass like spilled treasure. I asked everyone nearby, parents, trick-or-treaters, if they'd seen him. Most shook their heads. One woman mentioned she'd seen a firefighter guiding a little boy toward a white SUV, assuming it was just a dad taking his child home early. I sprinted down the street, searching frantically for the vehicle, but there were too many cars, too many headlights cutting through the fog. By the time the police arrived, the festive buzz had dissolved into uneasy silence. The house with the gravestones now sat in darkness. When the officers questioned me, I recounted everything, every meaningless detail. The strobe lights, the fake smoke, the muffled laughter. I pointed to where we had been standing, insisting that was the house. But when they checked, the place looked entirely different. The decorations were gone, the porch unlit, and the windows sealed with wooden boards that looked aged and warped. I stood frozen, disoriented, as if the whole display had been erased in an instant. One of the officers shined his flashlight over the wet grass, illuminating the metallic glimmer of candy wrappers scattered like evidence. They questioned every household along the street, but no one could recall who lived there. One neighbor swore the property had been abandoned since he'd moved in. Another said it once belonged to an elderly couple who died years ago. The police checked the records. There wasn't even an address corresponding to that spot anymore. It was listed only as an empty lot with no active dwelling. The more they searched, the more everything unraveled into confusion. I stayed out until sunrise, shouting Aiden's name into the empty air, until my voice gave out. Every shifting shadow felt like him for a second. Every far-off laugh twisted my heart. The officers promised to continue searching, but as the days dragged on, their updates grew shorter, emptier. They found no tire tracks from an SUV, no surveillance footage showing anyone in a firefighter costume, not even a trace of the candy brand Aiden had loved near the place where his bucket had fallen. It was as though the night itself had swallowed him. In the weeks that followed, I began walking that same street each evening after work. The house, or something that resembled it, still stood there, boarded, neglected, its porch caving slightly. Yet sometimes I'd notice faint anomalies, a weak orange glow bleeding from behind a boarded window, or a brief flicker of a strobe before vanishing. I told myself it was just my mind's exhaustion, but deep down I knew what I'd seen. Late that month, I parked across from the empty lot and turned off my engine. The street was utterly still, save for the faint hum of distant traffic. Right around the time Aiden had disappeared, a dim porch light blinked on. Its glow trembled, struggling to stay alive, but it was unmistakably there. The fog moved across the yard in that same slow, eerie drift. I stepped out of the car and approached the sidewalk, half convincing myself it was a coincidence. From somewhere beyond the boarded walls came the faint sound of children laughing, soft, overlapping giggles echoing through the slats. When I called out, the laughter cut off instantly. The light went dark, only the wind moved. I stood frozen for what felt like hours before I forced myself back into the car. The next morning I returned with an officer, but the house again was gone. Nothing remained but trampled grass and bare dirt. He told me to stay away, said grief could distort perception, that trauma reshapes memory. But I wasn't mistaken. I knew exactly where I had stood. I knew what I'd seen. Months later, a neighbor I barely recognized slipped something into my mailbox, a broken plastic pirate's sword, identical to the one I'd fastened around Aiden's waist that night. No note, no message, nothing. I contacted the police, but there were no fingerprints, no leads, nothing to trace. They suggested it might have been a sick prank. After that, I stopped asking questions. I stopped bringing it up at all. Years have passed, and every Halloween still unsettles me. Each October I think of that faint porch light and the echo of laughter hidden behind wooden planks. Sometimes I drive through that neighborhood again, torn between wanting to see that house reappear and praying it never does. No one ever found Aiden. No one ever located that white SUV. But some nights when the streets are empty and the wind sounds just right, I swear I can still hear his voice, faint, far away, asking if we can go to just one more house. The night carried that sharp autumn chill mixed with faint trails of smoke from dying bonfires still burning after Halloween festivities. I'd spent the evening at a small gathering hosted by an old university acquaintance who insisted that themed costumes were still essential, even in adulthood. By the time I headed out, it was well past midnight, and the road stretched out empty before me. The party had been far outside town, in a rural area where the highway cut through endless stretches of pine trees and farmland. Out there, the beams of your headlights felt like the only thing holding back the dark from swallowing everything whole. I remember how absolute the silence was. No cars, no music, just the low, steady hum of my tires gliding over the asphalt. A few miles in, I caught the shimmer of red and blue lights flickering off the tree line ahead. My first thought was that it must have been a crash, or maybe a late-night DUI checkpoint. It was Halloween after all. As I slowed, I saw two figures wearing reflective jackets standing by orange cones, and a patrol car angled crookedly on the shoulder with its lights still rotating. One of the men waved for me to stop, his gestures sharp and hurried. The second man stood unusually close behind him, doing nothing but watching. I rolled my window halfway down as the first one leaned in and asked for my license. His tone was polite but mechanical, like he was repeating memorized words. Something about his voice didn't align with the badge glinting under the lights. It sounded too youthful. When I handed him my ID, he shined his flashlight into my car, letting the beam linger longer than it should have. It swept across the seats, pausing on the empty passenger side. Behind him, the other man paced slowly, circling like he was waiting for something, gravel crunching underfoot. That was when I noticed he wasn't wearing boots. He had on white sneakers. That detail hit me a few seconds too late. My eyes flicked to the patrol car again. The paint looked faded, dull under the flashing light, and the lettering seemed uneven, too tightly spaced. A subtle unease crept in as I began to ask what department they represented. Before I could finish, headlights suddenly flared in my rearview mirror, bright, steady, and fast. A second later, the distinct wail of a real siren shattered the stillness. The man holding my license froze. He barked something I couldn't understand before both of them bolted for the trees, vanishing into the woods as another cruiser pulled up behind me. The officer who stepped out this time looked older, composed and calm, in a way that contrasted the chaos that had just unfolded. He told me to keep my hands visible as he approached, flashlight fixed on me. I explained what had happened, how two men had stopped me, taken my license, and ran. He immediately radioed for assistance, telling me to stay put. Within minutes, more patrol cars arrived, their strobing lights washing the pines in eerie, rhythmic flashes. One officer swept his light toward the trees and caught a faint line of footprints leading down a small slope toward a creek. A few minutes later, they found my license half buried in gravel near the cones, alongside several others. There were at least 5 scattered IDs, a pair of zip ties, and what looked like a fake badge. The patrol car turned out to be an old sedan crudely painted over, with magnetic decals that peeled off when touched. A chill ran through me, realizing how easily someone could have fallen for it. If that real cruiser hadn't appeared when it did, I might have been one of their victims. As I sat in my car with the engine still idling, heat blasting through the vents, the officers asked me to describe them. All I could recall was one man tall with a shaved head, the other stocky and wearing those ridiculous sneakers. Their jackets had reflective strips but didn't match. One was ripped near the shoulder while the other looked new. The officers exchanged quick glances. One quietly mentioned that there had been reports of fake checkpoints that same evening on other back roads nearby. That was the part that unsettled me most. This hadn't been a random stunt. It was orchestrated, maybe even rehearsed. When I finally reached home, I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a long while staring at the steering wheel. The adrenaline drained away, leaving a dull heaviness in its place. My phone lit up with missed calls and messages from friends checking if I'd made it back safely, but I couldn't bring myself to respond yet. Each time I blinked, I saw that badge flashing under false light and those sneakers stepping into the shadows. For weeks afterward, driving past that stretch of road made me instinctively slow down, expecting to see those imposters again. A few days later, a detective from the county sheriff's office followed up. He said the 2 men who ran off were still being identified, but were likely tied to other similar setups on rural roads that same night. Their victims were usually people driving alone, mostly women returning home late. That detail unsettled me the most. He thanked me for staying composed and providing a clear account, but I hadn't felt composed at all. Every image from that night still replayed in fragments: the fake car, the uneven badge, the man pacing like he was waiting for a signal. For a long time after, I avoided driving solo after dark. When I had no choice, I'd call someone and keep them on speaker until I arrived, eyes fixed on the road. My friends joked that I was being overly cautious until news broke of another fake checkpoint 2 counties away. Same setup, same reflective jackets. The driver who encountered them had kept going, and that decision had likely saved their life. That realization stayed with me, how close I'd come to not being one of the fortunate ones. The sheriff's department later confirmed that the fake patrol car had been stolen from a small vehicle auction. The IDs found at the scene belonged to people who'd been mugged weeks before in nearby towns. It seemed those men collected fragments of other lives to make their illusion more convincing. I never learned if they were ever caught. The calls stopped coming, and the story faded from the local news cycle. But I never took that highway again. Even now, years later, the sight of flashing lights on a dark, empty road sets off that same rush of dread before logic kicks in. I only stop in brightly lit areas and double-check every badge and uniform I see. Maybe those men are long gone, maybe even behind bars, but the fear they left still lingers in the passenger seat of my memory. And sometimes when the wind moves through the trees and I glimpse faint red and blue light through the branches, I have to remind myself it's just passing traffic, not the echo of that Halloween when imposters in uniform tried to make me vanish.